Hello, this is my final project for my class in multicultural counseling. Today I will be speaking of counseling individuals living in poverty. My name is Madison Fisher, and I am really excited to be speaking on this subject today. My first point for the purpose of this presentation is the importance of counseling individuals living in poverty. Our text by the authors Su et alia state, "Poverty does not constitute a cultural designation in the true sense of the word, yet the challenges and landmarks of life in poverty diverge enough from mainstream life to warrant consideration by counseling professionals. Keep in mind that people living in poverty constitute a diverse community with multifaceted racial ethnic backgrounds, cultural identifications, and religious practices. This overview, therefore, provides generalizations about a diverse group of people, and its applicability always needs to be assessed with regard to individual clients." Su et alia, 2022. What the authors of our text are stating here is that there is no one face to the homeless population or individuals living in poverty. They may be from many different racial ethnic backgrounds. They may be people of color, they may be white. It does not change the fact that they are individuals living in poverty. And so this is a consideration that every single one of a counselor's clients who are living in poverty, they're going to look different. They're going to come from different backgrounds. That's going to be important to remember. Those living in poverty may experience social exclusion, educational inequities, disparities of the justice system, classism and minimum wage, and healthcare inequities. Those living in poverty are often ostracized, socially excluded. Many times they are looked down upon because of their social status. There are educational inequities, particularly amongst children who live in poverty. They do not get the same kind of education as more affluent children, and this leads to varying degrees of illiteracy and getting into different schools that may lead them to better opportunities in the future. Disparities of the justice system, which we will get into a little bit later. Classism, minimum wage, they don't make the same as people who are middle class or upper class. And healthcare inequities, they don't have the same access to healthcare as middle class and more affluent individuals. Those living in poverty are subjected to a greater degree of traumatic stressors, and Hudson states that these stressors often lead to a higher likelihood of developing anxiety and depression. So why is it important? Why is it so important that individuals living in poverty receive counseling? Well, counseling is for everyone. In the same way as it's important to manage your stress on a daily basis, those living in poverty will want to manage their stress, address trauma from their past, create healthy headspace so that they can contribute to society in meaningful ways, and developing healthy coping mechanisms so that they can lead healthier lives independent of others. Point number 2, the essential elements of counseling individuals living in poverty. Let's take a look at what our text says. Su et al. State, "Poverty produces conditions conducive to the development of mental health issues. Individuals who live in poverty face a number of stressors, such as economic worries, discrimination, family conflict, inadequate housing, and frequent moves, all of which may result in psychiatric symptoms, including heightened physiological reactions to even minor anxiety-inducing events. In addition, The living environment associated with poverty can increase the risk of exposure to violence and trauma, resulting in high rates of stress disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and other problems such as aggression, delinquency, substance abuse, and academic difficulties. Su et al. 2022. So later on in our textbook, Su et al. Take from Smith, who has written a great deal on this subject, writing in 2005, 2009, and 2010. But ultimately, Smith states that there are a few essential key elements to counseling those in poverty. Those are going to be to supplement your knowledge of social class, poverty, and related issues. So, being aware of the issues, being not being ignorant on the subject. Number two, increasing your understanding and awareness of social class privilege. So being aware of your own privilege in the sense that those who are affluent, those who are middle class, receive a greater deal of opportunities than those who are homeless. Learning about the everyday realities of life in poverty. Essentially meaning seeing it from the other person's perspective. Learning to see the everyday signs of social class stratification and bias, again recognizing that there is class stratification, discrimination, bias. Integrating a social justice framework within counseling practice, that should be there regardless, but this is always a good reminder. Adopting a flexible approach to treatment. So again, remembering that it is individual counseling, that there is no one type of person living in poverty. They're all individuals with individual wants, desires, needs, all of those things. Being willing to incorporate problem solving and resource identification within sessions. You don't want to stay stagnant. You want to help address issues and help your client get to a place of healing and growth. And finally, incorporating an advocacy role into your work. We're going to speak more on that later. Ultimately, I do agree with our author's presentation of the subject of individuals living in poverty and counseling those living in poverty. Our text states, poverty does not constitute a cultural designation in the true sense of the word, but the challenges of a life in poverty are so different from mainstream life that it warrants consideration by clinicians. Counselors are likely to come from middle class or more affluent backgrounds and lack understanding about how the assumptions of mental health and the process of counseling may be antagonistic and detrimental to their clients. Being familiar with the demographics and the strengths of the poor is important for informed work. The poor face many challenges in their lives: invisibility and social exclusion, educational inequities, poverty-related mental illness, disparities in the judicial system, wage and healthcare inequities, and negative attitudes and beliefs about them. Su et al. 2022. Here's some reasons why I agree. Throughout their points on the subject, Su et al. Adopt an evidence-based support for their claims. For instance, they write, bail represents one of the more overt forms of classist discrimination. The poor remain in prison cells while the wealthier people accused of the same crimes go home. Moreover, funding for legal aid services is sufficient only to provide counsel to a small proportion of Americans who need it, with the result that millions of poor people are priced out of the U.S. civil legal process for the vast majority of their legal concerns. Rhode 2004 and Raymond 2007 has argued that the criminal justice system itself is deeply classist, in that it portrays crime as the misdeeds of the poor. In other words, street crimes like burglary, theft, and selling drugs are the contents of the typical police blotter and are detailed in national crime rate statistics. So that's a lot there, but they do adopt an evidence-based approach by citing some sources like Rhode from 2004 and Raymond 2007. Another reason why I can't disagree is that I have not lived in these conditions personally. I don't know what it's like personally. And finally, counseling applies to everyone. There is no reason to exclude individuals living in poverty from a positive counseling approach. To conclude, those living in poverty do not represent a culture per se, but are included in the field of multicultural counseling due to their minority status within society. The odds are stacked against those in poverty, so how should we as counselors and how can we as counselors respond? Well, we can provide opportunities for counseling, pro bono work, um, you know, maybe even starting group work. We can lobby if we do that in our free time, advocate for their rights, and volunteering at shelters, homes, ministries, etc. There's some great ministries here in Houston at churches and just ministries who this is all they do. And I know that this is true all across the United States. So there is a lot we can do. These are my references, and I really hope you enjoyed this presentation on the subject of counseling individuals living in poverty. Thank you so much.